Hey, y'all, if you're an avid trout fisherman, you want to come on up here and listen to this next speaker. My friend Captain Matt Chipperfield from Jacksonville, Florida, has put more giant trout in the boat than I ever will in my entire life. I've had the honor to fish with him a couple times down in Jacksonville. I happen to have my main client for my day job. I'm actually an engineer. Most people don't know that, but I try to, when I get a chance to go fishing while I'm down there, and I looked up Matt, and what I do when I go to a place that's outside of my normal comfort zone like Jacksonville is I shut up and listen. And the couple of times I fished with Matt has been just an absolute masterclass, and I've learned so much from him. And just fishing, hard lures, and just, he has a background in fisheries or marine science, yeah, and he is one of the most analytical people I've ever met, and he takes a lot of time to invest in understanding the behaviors of these trout, where they are, why they are, and then was able to put clients like me directly on the fish, like from the get-go. And our last trip was just unbelievable. We were just pulled into a spot and nothing was going on. He's like, I think in a couple minutes the topwater bite's going to go off. And like 2 minutes go by, and suddenly the place just blew up with fish busting on top. It was incredible. But listen, take notes, learn, and I'm going to be in the front row listening myself. But Matt, thank you very much for being here, and really appreciate you driving up here from Jacksonville. So.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me, Dave. I appreciate it. Thank you guys for coming out and supporting Release Over 20 and Cast It Forward. It means a lot to conservation. As Dave said, I am a full-time guide in North Florida. That's where I grew up, although I was not really much of a fisherman as a kid. I am now, obviously. But we're going to break down today's segment into 3 sections just to help you organize and retain some information. I'm going to talk about the past, how I got into trout fishing, how I was able to learn a lot about this fish in a relatively small amount of time. Then we're going to move into the nitty-gritty. We're going to get into what you can do right now in the present to go catch a gator trout in your area during the wintertime. And then we're going to move into the future and why we're looking forward to the next 3 to 4 months as trout fishermen and why they are the most exciting time to target gator trout. So as Dave said, I am a guide in North Florida. I have made a living off of targeting this trout, but as a kid, I was not a fisherman. I was an athlete and a surfer. That all changed when I went to Eckerd College in St. Petersburg on Tampa Bay. It was there that I met my roommate, Captain Tyler Capella. He's actually a mutual friend of CA and I. Tyler is the one who put the hook in me, so to speak. I went to college with a 2-man kayak. Tyler needed a fishing partner, and that ended up being me, and we've been best friends ever since. But more importantly, Tyler told me and showed me how to lure fish, introduced me to artificial lures, how to pull a flat, how to stalk fish, how to sight fish, how to catch tarpon, snook, trout, redfish, you name it, we targeted it. But essentially, when we graduated, we both graduated with a degree in fishing. We went there for marine biology and ended up being lifetime fishermen. But I moved back to Jacksonville, started interviewing for jobs, and ended up fishing a lot during the daytime. And I ended up gravitating towards an estuary that I have in Jacksonville called Guana. CA talked about that earlier. Guana is a very special place. I call it the 12-mile miracle. The Guana Preserve as a whole is about 70,000 acres of preserved land in North Florida, but it is home to a 12-mile long lagoon called Guana Lake. It is a brackish water, shallow water lagoon with a lot of bait, a lot of monster-sized trout, a very dense population of them, and more importantly, there are no natural predators for these trout once they get over 20 inches. If a bird can't lift them out of the water, there's no dolphin, there's no sharks. So essentially, they are home free. The nastiest, biggest predator in the water, besides the alligators that are too slow moving to do much, are these trout. They are the meanest thing I have in the estuary, and they are absolutely incredible in their size and number. But being around that estuary, having that in my backyard, being able to visit it on a daily basis allowed me to learn a lot about this fish just from firsthand experience. Seeing their patterns over time, what baits they prefer, what baits they don't like, seeing how their body changes over time, how their behavior changes. All the trends and patterns that you look for in trout fishing were readily available for me because of the population that I had. I am also a self-admitted trout nerd, just like the rest of you guys. That's why you're here. I'm into the biology. I'm into the science. One of the things I say on the boat a lot, and Dave has heard me say this, respect the science. If you know about the science, the biology of your fish, you're going to know how to catch it more because you understand its life cycle. But being around this estuary, being around other grid fishermen, Dr. Jay Wright is a friend of mine. He's also a mutual friend of CA and I. Being around a bunch of trout nerds, being a trout nerd myself, having a good estuary with a bunch of fish, I naturally gravitated toward this fish, and for 7 years now, I've been making a living off of chasing this fish. But enough about me. What we're really here to talk about is what you can do to catch this fish. So if you were to get up and walk out of this seminar right now because you're tired of listening to me talk, and you're going to go trout fishing, what are you going to do to go catch a trout? Well, let's do some basic stuff first. What time of year is it? It's wintertime. What does that mean? Water's cold. If you got cold water, you've got cold fish. More importantly, if you've got cold fish, you've got slow fish. They're moving slow. When the water starts going down in temperature, their metabolism slows down. They stop eating as much. They don't have the calories required to move fast. They're less aggressive. The fish are moving slow. So what does this mean to us as anglers if we're lure fishermen? We need to slow down. It sounds really simple in practice, but in application, it's gonna feel awkward. Some of you have probably never fished this slow before. When I say slow, I actually mean stop, dead stick, let it sit. CA mentioned it earlier, twitch, twitch, pause. I like to call it twitch, twitch, take a nap, hang out, talk to your friend, check your phone, stay tight on the line, but don't move the lure. This is gonna give lethargic fish a chance to catch up to your plug. If they're cold, they're not gonna chase. Fish that are chasing are aggressive. That tends to be a warmer water scenario. You're still gonna run into some topwater bites and some aggressive fish in the winter. It can happen, but your windows for that activity are much smaller because these fish are moving lethargically. They're slow. So you need to be able to stop your baits and let them sit. What does this mean to us as far as lure selection? You're going to need to put away your power baits. Power baits like CA we're talking about, they're things that you're casting far, you're working them fast, you're pounding them hard into the water. You don't want to be using power baits in the wintertime because the fish are just too slow and uninterested in chasing. You need to use lures that you can move slowly. So what are you going to gravitate towards? Twitch baits. That's the main thing I throw in the winter months and the water's cold. I'm going to throw twitch baits because I can stop them, and they're going to either do 3 things. They're going to suspend in the water column, they're going to slowly rise in the water column, or they're going to slowly fall in the water column. Those are the 3 main types of twitch baits that I use, whether they're soft plastic or hard. I use twitch baits almost exclusively until the water warms up and I can start throwing my top water again because I'm a top water junkie at heart. Most of us are. If we can throw a top water plug and watch that giant yellow mouth open up and eat it, that's what we're gonna throw. But you need to hold off on that in the wintertime, concentrate on your twitch baits. So what I've did today, I brought a couple examples of all 3 of these twitch baits that I throw. We're not gonna get into my entire tackle box because that would honestly take about 2 weeks of talking up here and nobody wants to do that. We're not gonna talk about color today much either because I think that's very relative to your region. The water I have in Guana is probably a bit different than the water you have up here. That changes wherever you go. There are some trends such as if it ain't chartreuse, it ain't no use. That's true. Silvers, pinks, oranges, golds, all of these are good, but that's all very relative to your region. What we're gonna talk about is more the presentation, the application of these twitch baits given the scenarios you have. So this right here is a suspending bait called a Sebel stick shad. So everyone's heard of Sebel. It's a pretty classic brand. I do not have any lure sponsors besides old Ice Strike here, which I love. So I can talk about some different brands of lures. This is a Sebel stick shad. It's a great tried and true lure. You'll notice, number one, it's got a lot of teeth marks on it. She works. But it's also large. It's got really heavy rattles in it. You can actually hear these rattles inside this thing. This is a very blatant big plug. It is also a suspending plug, so it's going to sit right in front of this fish or sit in the mid-column of water. I like to fish suspending plugs in a relatively shallow water. It's not gonna sink down to these fish. It's gonna sit toward the top or suspend right in the mid-column. So if I've got fish feeding in the mid-column, I'm gonna use a suspending bait. I'm also gonna use it in the wintertime because I can just twitch, take a nap, and it's just gonna sit right there. It may wobble a little bit, it may flutter, but it's gonna sit in front of these fish. On the note of big baits, guys, CA touched on it earlier. Do not be afraid to throw a big bait. Elephants do eat peanuts. You are going to catch a big fish now and then on a small plug or a small bait. But when you are targeting the biggest, baddest, meanest, most violent fish that we have in an inshore scenario that is a gator trout, she is not afraid to choke down a big bait. If you will pull up my social media right now, Captain Matt Chipperfield on Instagram, I've been posting a series of photos that are some of my best catches for trout to promote this event. The last photo I just posted about a couple hours ago is a photo of a 28-inch trout that inhaled a 14-inch redfish that was sitting in her gut, coming out of her throat, and the tail of the redfish was wagging out of her mouth like a tongue. She still ate my topwater plug with that fish in her face. That's not a fish that's eating because it's hungry. It's a fish that's eating because it's primal, it's nasty, it's mean, it's violent, it's the top of the food chain. She's not afraid to eat big baits. And when you are targeting these large trout, you know, I gotta say, grow a pair and throw a big bait at them. They're not afraid of this. So throw a big bait. Don't be afraid to break out a big plug that feels awkward to throw. Throw a big bait at them. A suspending bait is a great way to achieve a mid-column presentation with a big bait. Now we're gonna move into what I think is the most popular type of type of twitch bait, at least for the wintertime, and that is slow sinking baits. Now this right here is a MirrOlure XL. Again, I'm not gonna show you much today, that's small. These are all the big plugs for the big girls. This is a MirrOlure XL. It's a slow sinking bait. The other one that I have with me is something that the Texas guys have got me into. I just started throwing these, and I can tell you within the last 3 months, they have worked incredibly well. These are the custom corkies. They're very similar to the Paul Browns that CA was talking about, but these custom corkies are also a killer in the wintertime. The reason I like throwing sinking twitch baits, 2 reasons. One is that you can work different columns of water. You can throw it out and let it sink down to where you think these fish are in a deeper column, so you're not limited to fishing shallow water. You can fish some deeper depths out here. I know out in Charleston out here, you don't have nearly as many flats or even lagoons like I do in Jacksonville or in Florida, so you're probably gonna be fishing some more column of water. CA was talking about fishing with a local guy in my area, Eddie Kabler. He likes to throw a lot of sinking twitch baits or lip baits that get down because he fishes deeper water. So the main thing when you're deciding on a twitch bait is probably the first thing is gonna be your depth. If you have the depth issue, you're gonna have to pick a twitch bait based on what you're working as far as a column of water, how shallow it is. But the second reason I really like these falling twitch baits is in the wintertime, there's just something to a bait falling down in front of these fish that they like so much. Again, guys, I'm not a wizard. I can't tell you exactly why some of these fish like these things. I can't talk to them. I wish I could because I would know so much more about them. But they like a falling bait in the wintertime, and that's just something that I've noticed from firsthand experience, putting this custom corky next to a floating bait and watching this corky or a sinking bait outfish the other floating or suspending 3 or 4 to 1. It's very obvious that there's something to a sinking bait in the wintertime. Now, the limitation on sinking twitch baits is your depth. If you have a bottom that is grass or is oysters or is rock, and you're letting this thing sink to the bottom, you're probably gonna get some hang-ups. That's a problem because then you're not catching fish, you're hung up on a rock. So your depth is probably gonna be the #1 thing that you're gonna decide which one you're gonna use. You're also gonna decide based on what the column of water the fish are feeding in. The third kind that I have is probably the least popular for the winter in some of my area. In Texas, they use these a lot. But this is a slow rising twitch bait. They all kind of look the same, but they're all different buoyancies. This is what we call a double D. You've probably seen the Texas guys. It's called a Texas double D. These things are notorious out there. Main reason being Texas guys are fishing really shallow. If you have a floating twitch bait, you're not gonna have to worry about the bottom because when you're done twitching it, it's going to rise. It's going to come to the surface. So if your depth is really shallow, this is probably one of the first things you're gonna throw, possibly get away with a suspending bait, but if you throw a sinking bait in that, you're gonna get caught on the bottom. The other time I choose a rising twitch bait is if the bite is very aggressive. If they're feeding at the top column of water, or you're really shallow and you know they'll take it off the surface, or you got an aggressive fish who's chasing, these are probably gonna be something you're gonna throw because they're willing to come up and take it. Striking the surface is a very aggressive thing for a fish to do, and they only do it if they're in the right mood and they're feeling all juiced up. But those are the 3 types of twitch baits that you're gonna wanna throw in the wintertime. Remember, take your long dramatic pauses, twitch, twitch, take a nap, and don't be afraid to throw something really big. So now we're gonna transition into the future. And we're gonna get down into some stuff that's going to seem a little bit convoluted, guys. This is gonna be a little bit hard to follow at times, but I have done my best to outline what I'm about to talk about. I have a calendar sitting out here somewhere. There's a bunch of copies on a chair right over there. If you wanna grab it, this is a spawn calendar that I've made for you guys. But the reason we are excited about the next 3 to 4 months as fishermen for trout is we are going to experience the trout spawn. Just saying the word spawn makes me get goosebumps, guys. This is a fun time to be a trout fisherman. The reason why is when these trout start spawning, which is generally consensus around 65 to 68 degrees. It might vary from region to region, but around 65 to 68 degrees, these trout start experiencing a higher level of metabolism. The water's warming, their metabolism is speeding up, they're eating a lot, they have an excessive amount of food, therefore they have an excessive amount of calories in their body, and they can do things like produce eggs now. They have the energy required to do that. Much like our ladies in the audience, when they are pregnant, they are eating a lot. They're eating for 2. Well, these trout may be eating for 5 million. They could have anywhere from 500,000 to 5 million eggs in their gut. That's a fish that needs to eat a lot. So when these trout start spawning, producing these eggs, their metabolism is cranking, they're feeding a lot. Why does that matter to us as fishermen? Well, it should matter to you a lot, because when the fish is producing eggs, she's going to become extra swollen. She's going to become really heavy, really fat, really large. So your weight to length ratio is going to start skewing on the side of weight. It's going to become extra heavy for its size. So the chance of catching a massive world record trout becomes higher due to the fact that she's going to be heavier. Next thing, as I said earlier, their metabolism is raging. If their metabolism is raging and they're eating a lot, you're going to be catching more fish because they're going to be feeding more often. So that's number 2. You're going to get big fish and fat fish. You're going to get hungry fish. You're also going to get the third factor, which is aggressive fish. They're going to become more aggressive. Her body is telling her, you've got to eat. You have eggs in you. You've got to make healthy eggs. You've got to keep producing eggs. Therefore, you need to eat. You need calories. Eat, eat, eat. She's now going to become more aggressive. CA was saying earlier, these trout can be upwards of 10 years old. You don't get to be 10 years old as a trout if you're dumb. You're not going to make it there. You're going to get caught. You're going to get eaten. Something's going to happen. But if you're smart and you're wary and you're turning down lures because you've seen them before, you've got good eyesight, you've got good instincts, that's a fish that's really hard to catch. And that's why these fish are rare. Not so much that there aren't of them or they aren't there or there are not a lot of them. It's that they're smart. They've figured it out. They're not dumb. You don't get to be that old by being dumb. But when the spawn happens and her body's telling her, eat, 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 what that's going to do is outweigh her normal cautious nature, and she's going to be aggressive. She's going to see a twitch bait go past her and go, you know what? I know better, but I've got to eat. And she's going to jump on you. So during the spawn, you're going to get fat fish, you're going to get hungry fish, you're going to get aggressive fish. Big, dumb, angry fish are all fish we want to catch. That's a fun time. Now, there are times during the spawn that are better to target than others. Just because it's March, April, or May during the spawn. On that note, guys, you may get some spawners in February. It really just depends on your temperature grade. Temperature is the first thing that induces the spawn. It really depends on your region. My region, I'm going to start fishing for spawners probably late February. Your region, you might be as late as April, depending on how warm the water gets and how fast that happens. It's really region to region. But in general, you're going to be fishing the spawn through February, March, and April. And basically, what you're going to want to do is try and line up as many predictable factors that you can into your calendar that you know will induce fish to eat, starting with some very basic stuff and then getting into some like what I like to call the voodoo of trout fishing. It can feel like witchcraft at times. It's stuff that you're not certain works, but you think it works, or it's tried and true and you've heard it works, or you can back it up with statistics and hope it works. But first thing you're going to do is look in your calendar. I've got one out there for you if you want to look at it. Look at the calendar, mark down your full moons and your new moons. We all know that moon cycles induce fish to eat. It makes bites better. What that ends up doing, the lead up to the full moon, the lead up to the new moon, and some of the days on and around the new moon and the full moon are all good times to fish. And you can accurately predict that. We know our lunar cycle for the next several years. You're going to be able to predict the times that you want to fish for the moons just by writing them on the calendar. So you got your moon cycles. You know that's a good time to fish. Now you're going to look at that calendar. You're going to see a lot of times written on the dates. Those times are now where we're going to get into some of the voodoo. These are solunar cycles. What is the solunar cycle? Well, without getting crazy science on you, putting it simply, it's just the relative position of the moon and the sun relative to where the earth is at. But more specifically, what we're focusing on is the position of the moon as it orbits around the earth and the influence it has on the fish. Now, this is the solunar cycle and the solunar times. You've got 4 specific times during the solunar cycle that influence fish to eat. 2 of them are majors. They are 2-hour-long periods. There's two majors in every 24-hour period. There's 2 minors, which are 1-hour periods. in every 24 hours. The majors are when the moon is directly over your head or directly under your feet. Those are 2-hour periods. The 1 hours are when the moon is rising and when the moon is setting. These 4 times have been shown to influence large trout to eat. How do I know this? Well, as I said earlier, tried and true practice, firsthand experience. I've seen this work. I've seen the bite get really slow, nothing's happening. Here comes the moon cycle, bang, they're feeding, they're feeding, they're feeding, they're feeding. And out of nowhere, boop, it's done, it's over. It was a quick window. Start looking at your watch, start checking atmospheric conditions, and I'm not gonna be surprised you find out it's happening during these moon cycles. I also know that the moon cycles and the lunar cycle works because I have a good friend named Dr. Jay Wright. You guys may have heard of him. He's another mutual friend of CA and I. Dr. Jay Wright is a 3-time world record holder for trout on fly. He is an original gangster when it comes to trout fishing on fly. He is the biggest trout guru I know, and he has taught me more than I probably would have ever learned had I not met him. But Dr. Jay Wright, as I said, is an absolute guru, and this man took the time to research every single world record trout ever caught. The IGFA, which records world record catches across the globe, when you have a world record submission, they record the time and the date the fish was caught. This man went back in history and pulled up the moon calendars for these fish, put them side by side, and what he found was that 70% of world record trout were caught during a moon cycle. Whether it was a major or minor, 70%. You do not have to be good at math or statistics to know that 3 out of 4 fish is statistically important. That's 3 out of every 4 trout in that record book were caught during this moon cycle. That is really important, guys. And these are things that you can predict. You can know when the moon's gonna be full. You know when the lunar cycle is going to be over, under, rising, or setting. You also, in this area, I know I fish a non-tidal lagoon. It's a lot like Mosquito Lagoon. It's a little bit smaller, a little bit different as far as the geography, but it's a non-tidal lagoon. I don't have to worry about tides. Here, you're going to need to know your tides. So you can put your tides on this calendar as well and say, okay, I like fishing an outgoing tide, or I like fishing an incoming tide, whether it's slack or high or low, whatever your preference is. That is also predictable. You can put this on the calendar. You're also gonna notice on there that I have some of those majors and minors highlighted. If you look closely, that's because those are majors and minors that line up with the mornings and the evenings. When's a good time to go fishing in general? First thing in the morning. When's another time? Later in the evening. For trout, why is that? Well, might be low light, could be some other factors, but generally, first thing in the morning, later in the evening, those are good times to go fishing for trout. So on this calendar, you've now got 4 things that you can accurately predict. Lunar cycle, lunar cycle, tide, and the time of day that you need to line up. And what you're doing is what I call accelerating the bite. You are stacking as many factors on top of one another as you can that are predictable, that are gonna let you know which days you need to go fishing. This is also going to help a lot of you guys that are professionals and are working a 9 to 5, have a family, lots of responsibility. You aren't as fortunate as CA and I to be able to get out on the water on a random Tuesday in the middle of the day when we know the trout fishing is gonna be good. You're going to have to plan ahead a lot of times and pick your days that you can fish because your wife, Blondie, says you can't go fishing at certain times. You've got to find a certain time of day that you can go. This is gonna allow you to triage your days, to pick priority on days that you think are gonna be better than others. Now, there is one variable that's gonna come into play that you're gonna have to adjust to on the fly, that the calendar may get skewed by. What that is weather. Mother Nature always has alternative ideas about when we are and allowed to go fishing and what we're gonna run into when we get out there. It's part of why it's fun. Sometimes it's like gambling and you hit and you think you're a god. Other times you go out there and you get skunked and you wonder why you fish at all. But that's Mother Nature playing with you. You can have all these variables on a calendar. You can have, let's say you like to fish an outgoing tide. You've got an outgoing tide. You've got a major moon cycle. It's first thing in the morning and it's the lead up to the new moon. Whew, it's giving me the heebie-jeebies. It's gonna be good, it's gonna be good. And all of a sudden, Mother Nature sends a 30-mile-per-hour northeastern and wipes out that week. Well, fishing's probably gonna be a little difficult that week. You may not go at all because it's gonna be tough. But you can use that for the opposite side of that. Let's say you've got all those 4 factors lined up, it's looking prime, and now you notice like, okay, there is a 30-mile-per-hour northeastern coming, but it's 2 or 3 days out. What have you got now? Prefrontal conditions. Everybody knows who's a trout fisherman, prefrontal conditions can get you some better fishing, more fishing, bigger trout. So you can use it to your advantage or your disadvantage, depending on how that works. But if you've got all 4 of these factors, tide, lunar, time of day, lunar cycle, you're gonna be able to pretty much predict during the times, okay, these are better than not to fish. I do it from February, March, April, and May. Those tend to be the 3 to 4 months that you can do this. Trout will continue spawning throughout the summer. However, it's comparable for me to the start of a marathon. At the beginning of the spawn, everybody is stacked up right on that 65 to 68 degree line, and then it happens and everybody crosses the threshold at the same time, and you get a bunch of fish in the estuary spawning all at the same time. As opposed to later in the year, in the summer and the late spring, all these fish have been spawning, they're all crossing the finish line at different times, they're staggered, they're not as many all of a wave of spawners, you get a little bit more of a stagger. So that's why the beginning of the spawn tends to be the more successful period, just due to the fact that you can predict it a bit better because the column of water is rising. In summary today, guys, if you want, I know I just covered a lot of information really fast. You're gonna have some questions. I would love to hear them, either now or afterwards. Please come up and talk to me. I don't mind helping you construct a spawn calendar for your own area. Tidesforfishing.com. salunarforecast.com. These are all websites that you can do this for your area and put all these things on there. If you have any questions, I've attached my business card there too. Feel free to reach out, send me a message, give me a call. If you just want to talk shop, figure out how to create your own calendar, don't mind that. If you want to set up a charter, that's awesome too. In summary, guys, as you go forward and fishing into the spawn, fishing for these gator trout, Dave has heard me say this too. It's something I say to a lot of my clients. When you're lure fishing, especially, the upper echelon of fishing we're all a part of, no eat is arbitrary. Every eat means something. It's not random. You didn't just get lucky. You did something right. So if you're fishing and you can fish analytically, be aware, be cognitive of what you're doing, always examine what you're doing, you're going to start noticing trends. You're going to start noticing over time and keying into little things that are like insider trading information. You're going to have information and cue into little tiny things that most people aren't aware of because they're not looking at it like a science. So respect the science. No eat is arbitrary. Good luck out there this year. I hope you guys go stick a 30-incher, and if you do, send me a picture of it. I want to see it. So, yes, CA.
You had me at Dr. J. Wright. You had me.
By the way, CA, it's really surreal to be up here on stage speaking in front of a crowd that you spoke in front of before me, and hearing my name come out of your mouth was awesome.
Oh, your reputation comes ahead of time anyway.
Thank you.
Do you have February 15th, 16th, 17th, or 18th open?
I do. I think that's when the full moon is, right?
It is.
Yeah. So again, guys, the calendar you have in front of you, that is my spawn calendar from March of last year. I just had it available, so I just made a bunch of copies of it for you. But this year, the full moons, for the most part during the spawn, will be middle of the month. New moons will be at the end/beginning of the months. So you can go ahead and mark that on your calendar. But yeah, you won it. It's all yours, man.
Oh, we're going to film. We're doing this.
Let's do it.
Matt Chipperfield is going to be on Flats Class TV. I hope you guys learned something, because a lot of this stuff was the straight gospel truth. Those salooners absolutely work. I mean, I was just telling my wife a second ago, I go, David Stutz went fishing with me the other day. I'm going to try not to swear. It was a crappy day of fishing, except for the end of the first salooner in the morning. We got one really stud redfish, and it sucked for 5 hours. And then we hit the major, and he rolled 5 fish in a row. And I was just waiting for the major home so I could get a check.
Yep.
And we fished the major, got 5 more fish, and we left. But it is the gospel truth. A lot of that stuff, it is not voodoo. It is real science, and it works.
Thank you, C. I appreciate that, man. Anybody else? Sir? Yes. That gets down to the handling and the conservation aspect for sure. On my boat, I always carry a pair of calipers. I have a boga grip because I like to weigh my fish too in case I catch the right one. I don't weigh a whole lot of fish anymore unless I think they're going to cross the 8-9 pound threshold. Unless my client wants me, it's their personal best. They want to know how much it weighs. I don't like to hang fish very often unless I have to. It's very quick, in, out, reading, down. And for the most part, in between everything I'm doing, whether it's taking pictures, unhooking, all that, the fish is in the water the whole time. The reason I don't like to hang fish, for the same reason we don't like to hang tarpon, when you take a fish of that size and you remove her from what is a zero gravity environment, because fish live in the water. They're buoyant. They live in a zero gravity environment. They're kind of floating around. When you yank them out of the water, their internal organs sag and push, and they can actually damage and internally bleed. So when I handle a fish, a spawner especially, I'm going to bring her boat side. I have a rubber-coated net, so it doesn't take the slime off their outer layer, just like you don't want to do with freshwater trout. That's the protection from bacteria. So you want to leave the slime layer on. I net them with a rubber net. I then grab the bogas immediately and attach them to her jaw and let the net float. It's a floating net, so I just drop the net there so the net's not rubbing all over her. If I can get her out of the net right away, I will. Sometimes there's plugs and stuff I got to work on, but she's in the water, out of the net, onto the bogas. And usually I'm turning around to my client saying, hey, can you do me a favor and grab that camera, or like go stand on the bow. That's where we're going to do our photo. She's in the water. The client's in position. Boom, fish is out of the water, into their hands. I have my camera out. Boom, photo. Give me back the fish. Into the water immediately. My fish are usually never out of the water more than 15, 20 seconds maximum. In the summertime, that's even more critical because there's less oxygen in the water. Cold water holds more dissolved oxygen, so in the wintertime, you're going to get more really healthy releases. In the summer, if you catch a big trout, you need to spend some quality time reviving her, making sure that she's going to swim off with some gusto. And if she doesn't, you may have to give her the tarpon treatment like CNA have done multiple times, where you turn on the trolling motor and you just drag her until she starts kicking, trying to get some more oxygen in her. But pair of calipers, either those cheap plastic little fish grips or a more expensive pair of titanium boga grips if you're into it. And also a nice long pair of needle nose pliers, or Dr. J turned me onto this. He's a doctor, so he uses these little long, like surgical equipment that you can get all the way back into the throat and try and pull things out. Another little pro tip on the side of that, now that I'm rambling and thinking about it, if you do catch a trout, like CA was talking, back in the throat, one thing I like to do to try and make the process as least traumatic as possible is I call it going in through the back door. You can open up their gill plate and slide in with these really thin little needle nose pliers and just pop the hook out backwards and try and shove it through her mouth, or you can pull it backwards out of her gill plate, clip it, and then pull the line out instead of trying to forcefully get down in the back of her throat. But I appreciate that question. That's a great question. Handle these fish with care, guys. These are our spawners. Yes, sir.
Welcome to the team, man.
Appreciate it.
Great selection of this guy. So I got a question. You're talking about majors and minors, right? So all things aside, we all know, well, maybe a lot of us know, fishing that twilight period during a major minor killer time frame.
Oh, yeah.
If you're not on that twilight period, are you tracking a better major or a better minor as far as catching these girls? Are you finding like maybe a super high tide or maybe a super low tide?
Well, again, with me with tide, I'm kind of spoiled with the tide because I get to fish in a non-tidal lagoon. As far as which major in my, I always like majors and minors that are first thing in the morning or last in the afternoon, or late in the evening. Just at low light periods for trout, it's well known that this is when these fish like to feed. It could be for a number of factors. I think it's just harder for them to identify plugs. It's more of a blurry line as opposed to a clear line when it's got a lot of light. Usually low light periods tend to also be times when the fish are waking up in the morning or they're getting ready to go to bed and they need to feed either first thing in the morning or right before it gets dark and they can't feed anymore. Sometimes that holds true, sometimes it doesn't. Also cloudy days. You'll notice on that calendar, guys, I've got a lot of majors that I haven't highlighted that are like right in the middle of the day, like 2 o'clock in the afternoon to 4 o'clock. Now, just because that major doesn't line up with a low light period doesn't mean it's not going to be absolutely killer. Those are probably still times that I'm going to be out there. Let's say we were talking about, unpredictable factors in the weather. If I'm sitting there, I got a Wednesday free, I notice I've got a major 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it's probably going to be a good time to fish. It may not be as good as another time where you've got the major first thing in the morning or in the evening, but let's say I know that day it's going to be overcast all day long, and I've got a major right in the middle of the day. The water's still a little bit chilly, and the water's warming through the middle of the day, and I've got a major, and I've got overcast skies. Those are 3 factors right there that I'm going to take into account. Or you've got cloudy skies, and you've got an incoming front. That's going to make that day better. So just so I haven't highlighted those salooner times doesn't mean I'm not going to fish a major in the middle of the day. But you're going to notice that more often than not, the majors that do line up with low light periods in the evening or morning will be a bit more successful than majors that line up in the middle of the day. Now, another thing, I've said this to Dave many, many times. It's funny because we get up here and we talk about like we know what we're talking about. There's an exception to every rule that I'll give you right now. I mean, you might go out tomorrow and catch your biggest trout of your life. It has nothing to do with the salooner cycle. The water temp is really cold. nothing I just said even holds true. This is fishing. I mean, you're taking a shot in the dark sometimes it lines up, sometimes it doesn't. But these are trends that we notice over time that statistically speaking will increase your chance of catching. But just because I don't have a highlighted major in the middle of the day doesn't mean that it can't be amazing. But yeah, majors in the evenings and in the mornings, a little bit better than not. All good? All right, guys, thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it. Thank you.